The precinct is bustling with activity on an early Monday morning, filled with officers preparing for the day ahead. Some are grabbing coffee, while others gossip about their weekend plans. The atmosphere is casual, almost too comfortable, as everyone seems to be unaware of the significant change that's about to occur. The precinct has recently appointed a new police chief, but the officers have yet to meet her. Officer Jim Radner, a senior officer with a long tenure, is at the center of the precinct's cliques. Known for his cocky attitude and condescending remarks, Radner often mocks his subordinates and enjoys making others feel small. His actions are tolerated by the higher-ups because of his years of service, but his blatant prejudice toward minorities is widely known and largely ignored. He's one of those officers who prides himself on never following the rules if they don't suit him. On this particular morning, Radner is overheard making racially charged jokes as he sips his coffee. His voice is loud and harsh, but no one dares to challenge him, not even the younger officers who wince at his remarks. They know his behavior is frowned upon but remain silent, afraid to confront the senior officer. Meanwhile, Angela Wright, the newly appointed chief, arrives at the precinct. Dressed casually in plain clothes, she blends in with the busy environment, not immediately drawing attention. Her poised, confident demeanor, however, is unmistakable to anyone paying close attention. Little do the officers know, the unassuming woman with a calm presence and steady stride is their new boss. No one recognizes her at first glance, and Angela, aware of the reception she might receive, decides to quietly observe the precinct before making herself known. As she walks through the hallways, a few officers glance at her but dismiss her without a second thought. They assume she's just another outsider, a visitor, or someone lost in the building. Angela, ever the professional, doesn't make a scene but is keenly aware of the murmurs that follow her. Angela, now standing in the middle of the precinct, takes a deep breath before approaching Officer Jim Radner, who is leaning against the desk, sipping his coffee and exchanging jokes with a few of his colleagues. With the busy precinct surrounding her, Angela approaches Jim casually, her voice calm but clear, asking, "Excuse me, officer, could you point me in the direction of the chief's office?" Jim glances at her and, without missing a beat, sneers. "What are you doing here? This isn't a place for charity workers. You lost or something?" His voice is laced with disdain, and the jab at her appearance stings even though Angela remains composed. She doesn't flinch, refusing to be ruffled by his condescending attitude. "Just trying to get to the right place." Angela responds evenly, still trying to maintain the professional, calm demeanor she's known for. As if in a deliberate move to assert dominance, Jim stands up from his desk and takes a long, exaggerated sip from his cup of hot coffee. His eyes never leave Angela, the mockery evident in his posture. Suddenly, without any warning or provocation, Jim sloshes the contents of the coffee cup toward Angela, dousing her head and shoulders with the hot liquid. The sound of the coffee splashing against her clothes is loud, and for a brief moment, the entire precinct falls silent. Jim bursts out laughing, his loud and boisterous chuckles echoing in the room as the other officers stand frozen in disbelief. "Guess that'll cool you off, lady," Jim says with a smirk, clearly expecting to see her fluster or retaliate in anger. The officers around him exchange uncomfortable glances, unsure how to react. But Angela, she remains eerily calm. She doesn't lash out or shout at him. Instead, she simply wipes the coffee off her face with the sleeve of her jacket, as though she's had far worse things thrown her way. Her eyes never leave Jim, who stands there, still grinning, as if expecting her to explode. "Is that supposed to be funny, officer?" Angela asks, her voice steady and unwavering. Her demeanor is so composed that it feels like the entire room has shifted. A few seconds of silence hang in the air before Angela adds, "I was just trying to get directions to the chief's office, but I guess I'll find it on my own." The officers who had been watching the scene unfold begin to shift uncomfortably. Some of them are now regretting their initial reactions. They had all assumed Angela was just another naive outsider who would back down in the face of such an offensive display. But she's not just some visitor. She is poised, calm, and collected under pressure. And her dignity in the face of such disrespect has already started to make an impression. Jim, realizing he's taken things too far, hesitates for a moment. His smirk fades, and for the first time, he seems unsure of himself. His bravado starts to crumble as he watches Angela calmly brush off the attack. "Sorry about that," Jim mumbles under his breath, but it's clear he's less apologetic than he is embarrassed by his own actions. Angela doesn't acknowledge his apology. Instead, she takes a deep breath, glancing at the other officers in the room. Some of them look embarrassed for Jim, while others seem to admire Angela's strength and control. Angela, still unwavering, simply turns on her heel and walks away. As she heads toward the chief's office, the silence in the room lingers, with many of the officers now realizing they've underestimated her. Angela's composed demeanor hasn't just caught Jim off guard, it's made the entire room question their assumptions. Angela strides confidently into the chief's office, her shoes clicking against the polished floors as the door quietly shuts behind her. She places her bag on the desk, settling into the chair as though it's always been her rightful place. Outside the office, the murmurs of the precinct's staff begin to escalate, the quiet realization dawning on them all. The new police chief, whom they had all assumed was just another outsider, is, in fact, the person they've been underestimating since the moment she walked in. The room begins to buzz with uncomfortable energy, and the sound of footsteps quickly fills the hallway as Angela arranges her things. Moments later, the precinct door swings open, and Jim Radnor is summoned into the office by a stern voice on the intercom. His expression instantly shifts from cocky confidence to shock, and he hesitates for a moment before pushing the door open. "Yeah, Chief?" Jim stammers, standing uneasily in the doorway. He's trying to maintain his bravado, but his face is now pale, the reality of the situation setting in. Angela looks up from her desk, her gaze sharp and unwavering. "Officer Radnor, have a seat." Jim, despite his nerves, sits down and begins to speak, his voice laced with forced casualness. "Look, Chief, I didn't mean for things to go down like that. It was just a joke, you know? I didn't know you were, coming in. He stumbles over his words, trying to downplay his actions. Angela's steady gaze doesn't waver, and her posture remains calm and dignified. She lets him speak for a moment, but her silence only serves to deepen his discomfort. The room is quiet except for the sound of his fidgeting, the stark contrast between his unease and her calm authority growing more pronounced with every passing second. "You didn't know?" Angela asks, her voice low but firm. "I see. Well, let me make something very clear, Officer Radnor." She stands up from behind the desk and walks around to stand directly in front of him. Respect is the foundation of leadership. Without it, this badge means nothing. Jim starts to look nervous, his face flushing as he realizes the weight of her words. His eyes dart around, hoping for an escape. But Angela is unyielding, her stance strong. "You think that because of your seniority or your position, you can act with impunity, that you can disregard a fellow officer because of their gender, race, or status, you've forgotten one thing. Angela pauses for a moment, letting the tension build in the room. This badge represents service. It represents integrity. But it also represents respect. Respect for the people we serve and for each other. Without that, this badge means nothing. Jim opens his mouth to respond, but Angela raises a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. She looks around at the officers who have gathered outside the office door, overhearing her words. I don't care if you've been on the force for 10 years or 20, she continues, her voice unwavering. Anyone who can't live up to that standard, anyone who can't respect every individual who walks through these doors, has no place here. This isn't just a place for enforcing laws. It's a place for upholding dignity. Her words hang in the air, thick with significance. The officers outside the office, who have slowly gathered to listen in, exchange uncomfortable glances. Angela's speech is clear. No one, no matter their tenure or rank, is exempt from accountability. Jim's face goes from pale to red, his shame now evident. His eyes lower, and he shifts uncomfortably in his seat. I understand, Chief. I didn't know you were. Of course you didn't. Angela interrupts, her voice soft but carrying a weight that silences him. You didn't know me, and you didn't care to learn. You saw an opportunity to belittle, to bully, to make assumptions, and you took it. Her tone softens ever so slightly. I'm here to remind you, Officer Radner, that leadership is about respect, fairness, and accountability. You failed on all 3 counts today. The room is silent, the weight of her words hanging over everyone. Angela's eyes narrow slightly as she looks directly at him one last time. This is your chance to reflect on your actions, and I expect nothing less than a full understanding of the impact your behavior has on your fellow officers and the people we serve. I will be watching closely, Officer Radner. Don't forget that. With that, she turns and sits back down behind her desk, signaling the end of the conversation. Jim is left standing there, speechless, as he begins to absorb the full extent of his mistake. The officers outside the office slowly disperse, but the lesson Angela has imparted lingers in the air. She has proven herself as a leader, someone who stands firmly for respect, equality, and integrity, and they now know the high standards she will hold them all to. Jim, for the first time, begins to realize that true leadership doesn't come from power or seniority. It comes from respect. And in that moment, he begins to see just how far he has to go to earn it. Angela's decision to hold Jim accountable was swift and decisive. She ordered him to undergo a mandatory sensitivity training program and placed him on desk duty for the foreseeable future. The desk duty, a significant downgrade from his previous role, was not just a punishment, but a reminder of the importance of respect and professionalism in the force. You'll be spending the next few weeks in training, Officer Radner, Angela told him sternly, and I expect you to take it seriously. This is your chance to reflect and learn how to treat every individual with dignity, no matter their rank or background. Jim sat quietly, his earlier bravado completely shattered. The humiliation of being called out in front of the entire precinct weighed heavily on him. He was no longer the officer others feared or respected. Instead, he found himself in the position of having to rebuild his reputation from the ground up. Angela's leadership style was immediately put to the test. She wasn't afraid to take swift action when it came to injustice, but her approach was always firm yet fair. The officers in the precinct who had once silently tolerated Jim's prejudices and bullying behavior began to see Angela's strength and resolve. She wasn't just a figurehead. She was someone who would do whatever it took to ensure that the force operated with integrity and respect. Over the following weeks, the atmosphere in the precinct began to shift. Officers who had previously remained quiet about the toxic culture began to speak out. Angela's zero-tolerance policy for discrimination had created an environment where silence was no longer acceptable. She made it clear that this would be a place where everyone was held accountable, no matter their seniority or position. One afternoon, Officer Julia Monroe, a member of the department who had worked alongside Jim for years, pulled Angela aside. "I just wanted to thank you," Julia said quietly, her eyes filled with gratitude. "We've all known what Jim was like, but no one ever did anything about it. It's a relief to finally see someone taking action." Angela nodded, her expression calm but resolute. "It's time for a change. We need to create a safe environment where every officer can do their job with respect and dignity. No exceptions." Julia smiled. "I'm glad we have someone like you leading us." As the weeks went by, the precinct began to operate under a new sense of respect. Officers who had once remained silent in the face of inappropriate behavior now stood up for their colleagues. Angela's leadership became a catalyst for positive change, and the department began to feel more united and motivated to serve the community with honor. Jim, meanwhile, faced his own internal struggle. The sensitivity training was tough. He had to confront the biases he had carried for years and recognize the harm his actions had caused. For the first time, he saw the extent of his behavior and how it had affected his colleagues and the people he swore to protect. At the end of his training, Jim was a changed man. He approached Angela with a sincere apology. "Chief Wright," he said, his voice steady but tinged with regret, "I want to thank you for giving me a chance to reflect. I've learned a lot, and I know I have a long way to go. I can't undo what I did, but I'm committed to being a better officer, someone who earns the respect of this department and the people we serve." Angela studied him for a moment before responding, her tone firm but encouraging. "I appreciate your words, Officer Radner. The journey to redemption starts with acknowledgement and action. Now, it's up to you to prove through your actions that you've learned and that you're committed to change." Jim nodded, his eyes showing genuine remorse. "I will, Chief. I won't let you down." Angela's faith in him was guarded, but she recognized his willingness to change. Redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about the effort to do better moving forward. As the precinct began to heal from the wounds of the past, Angela knew that true leadership came from creating an environment where growth was possible, even for those who had faltered. The change in Jim and the precinct was a testament to Angela's leadership. She had not only taken action to hold a single officer accountable, but had also begun to transform the culture within the force. Her unwavering commitment to justice, equality, and respect was beginning to take root, and it was clear that her presence had made an indelible mark on the department. The precinct was changing, and with it, the future of law enforcement in the city. A new era of respect and accountability had begun, one that would lead to better relations with the community and a stronger, more united police force. During his mandatory sensitivity training, Jim Radner began to reflect on the years of unchecked prejudice and arrogance that had defined his career. As he sat through sessions on racial biases, systemic inequalities, and the importance of empathy in policing, a growing sense of shame took root in him. He had always prided himself on his position, on his authority, but in that classroom, he realized how hollow that pride had been. The stories from his colleagues, the experiences shared by people of color within the community, and the lectures on the history of injustice in law enforcement opened Jim's eyes in ways he hadn't expected. For the first time, he saw himself not as a protector of the law, but as someone who had contributed to a culture of fear and division. He had allowed his position to mask his prejudices, and, in doing so, had actively contributed to the very problems he had sworn to fight against. One afternoon, after a particularly emotional session in which an officer shared how he had been treated differently by his colleagues because of his race, Jim sat alone in the training room, wrestling with his thoughts. His mind kept returning to the incident with Chief Angela Wright, the woman who had humiliated him in front of his peers but had also shown him something valuable: leadership that didn't need to assert superiority through intimidation. Angela had made it clear that respect was not something to demand but to earn. She had handled him with dignity even after everything he had done. It was then that Jim knew he had to make things right. His first step was to approach Angela, to offer a sincere apology. He knew words wouldn't undo the damage, but he was determined to show through his actions that he was committed to change. A few weeks later, Jim found Angela in her office. He stood in the doorway for a moment, unsure of how to start, but when Angela looked up, he simply said, "I owe you an apology. I was wrong, and I'm sorry for what I did." Angela didn't interrupt. She simply nodded, allowing him the space to speak. "I've been through the training," Jim continued, "and I've spent a lot of time thinking about how I treated you and how I've treated others in this department. It's not just about one mistake. It's about years of ignorance and prejudice. I want to be better. I need to be better." Angela paused, studying him for a moment. "Actions speak louder than words, Officer Radner," she said calmly, "but I appreciate your honesty. It's a start." Jim left the office that day with a renewed sense of purpose. He had made the first step, but he knew the real work would come with every interaction, every decision, and every day he spent working to regain the trust of those around him. Under Angela Wright's leadership, the precinct underwent a remarkable transformation. Her approach was rooted in fairness, respect, and accountability, and it didn't take long for the officers to see the difference in her leadership style. She didn't rule with fear or intimidation like some of her predecessors. Instead, she led by example, showing empathy, demanding respect, and holding everyone to high standards. Officers who had once been silent, afraid of speaking out against colleagues like Jim, now felt empowered to share their concerns and voice their opinions. There was a sense of unity among the staff that had been lacking before. The precinct's atmosphere became more collaborative. There were fewer confrontations and more open discussions about ways to improve policing practices. Angela implemented regular check-ins with her officers, encouraging dialogue about the challenges they faced, both professionally and personally. She also made sure that all officers, no matter their rank, had access to the support and resources they needed to deal with the emotional and psychological weight of their jobs. Jim Radner, once the epitome of the toxic culture within the precinct, became one of Angela's most ardent supporters. He was no longer the same man who had bullied her upon their first encounter. Jim worked hard to earn the respect of his colleagues, proving to everyone that people are capable of change when given the right guidance and support. He began attending sensitivity training, not just because he had to, but because he saw its value. He listened, learned, and grew. As time passed, Jim became known for his fairness and integrity. He was actively involved in mentoring younger officers, helping them navigate the complexities of their profession with a focus on respect, equality, and community engagement. His transformation became a testament to the power of leadership, not just to change individuals, but to change the culture of an entire organization. The precinct was no longer a place where power was misused and biases unchecked. Under Angela's leadership, it became a beacon of hope and a model for what policing could look like when officers were committed to serving and protecting every community member with dignity and respect. And for Jim, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one where he no longer saw himself as above others, but as part of a team working together for a common good.